Hello and welcome back. Thank you for joining us on this third episode of TechDispatch Talks. I'm here in the EDPS studio today with Andy Goldstein, technology and privacy expert here at the EDPS, who is going to talk to us about federated learning. Let's get cracking. Andy, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, it's my pleasure.
Okay, let's get started. We'll start with a really basic question for you. What is federated learning? Can you explain to the audience and to people in the studio here in simple terms, what is federated learning?
Sure. So federated learning is a way to build AI models. So typically what you have a central server with lots of data, lots of training data, and you build the AI model on that server. In federated learning, you have a lot of devices, and each device holds its training data. Each device will also build its local AI model. Once each device has its model, it will share it with the others, and it will build a global model, which will then be redistributed to the devices. So once the global model is redistributed to the devices, the work continues, the processing continues to come to a final global AI model that's used by the devices. So there's two ways to share the local AI models. The first way is to send it to a central server, and the central server will redispatch it. And the second way is for the devices themselves to share the data between themselves, just the models, not the training data. So in essence, federated learning is a way to build AI models without sharing the data.
Interesting. But is it fair to say that it's a collaborative way, a collaborative form of machine learning?
It is. It is a collaborative way. But again, the important point is that the training data resides only on the local devices and is never shared.
Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about later about how that potentially is a positive aspect for privacy in the field of AI. I wanted to discuss why the EDPS chose this topic. The audience may be familiar that the Technology and Privacy Unit of the EDPS writes a lot of tech reports to predict, understand the privacy and opportunities of emerging technologies for now and the future. Why did the EDPS choose this topic specifically to feature in their report and in this podcast we are filming today?
The EPS collaborated with the AEPD, which is the Spanish Data Protection Authority. And both organizations are interested in looking at technology trends. And we chose this one because we thought it was an interesting alternative way to do data sharing. So on top of that, the EDPS in its Taxonar 2022-2023, which is another EDPS publication, well, we already looked at federated learning, but this time we wanted to dig deeper in the topic.
It really shows that technology goes hand in hand with privacy and data protection. You can't have technology working in a sustainable way at the use of individuals without privacy and safety behind. So we've just discussed what is federated learning, the interest that EDPS has in this topic. And for our audience who may not be familiar with the nitty gritty of AI technologies, in which context can I, as a user, and other people using, devices, apps, mobile phones, tablets, in which context can federated learning be used? Will the audience have come across federated learning perhaps without even knowing?
Yes, definitely they will have. So different contexts, a wide variety of contexts. For example, in healthcare, where you can have the processing of sensitive data. That's very interesting to have federated learning. You can have also a speech recognition, which everybody or a lot of people actually use. That in that context, federated learning is also interesting because you don't send your voice recording outside of your device. You also can use federated learning in autonomous transport systems like self-driving cars, where you don't necessarily want to send your geolocation data. And you also don't want to send all the telemetry data that the car collects because it's very resource intensive. So you don't want to overburden the network.
So you've mentioned healthcare, transport systems, speech models. Are you aware of any cases where federated learning is used in the financial services or educational context, for example?
In the financial sector, it can be used. Often it could be used to detect inappropriate transactions. So if you have an AI model that understands what the people usually do with their financial transactions, it can detect something that's unusual and flag it, possibly even block it. Possibly.
Okay, so we've just talked about fields in which federated learning may or may not be useful. Um, Going more into everyday usage, are there any apps or devices that use federated learning? For example, if I pull out my phone, do I have any apps where there's federated learning used or could be used?
Yeah, certainly. Two major players in the technology field use federated learning, at least two. We know of Apple, which uses it for speech recognition and voice recognition. Uh, you have the AI assistant, which is called Siri, and Apple uses federated learning to provide the data without sending the data to Apple. The data stays on the device, which is good for privacy and for the individual. You also have Google, which uses federated learning in this Gboard keyboard for predictive texts. So you type in the text and it gives you the next word. This is all thanks to federated learning.
Oh wow! So actually, yes, when you write messages and the next word is guessed, that's federated learning being operated, presumably.
Yes, that's how Google chose to implement it, that so that they prevent all those messages being sent back to Google. It stays on your device, so the individual has more guarantees in terms of privacy.
Okay, thank you so much. So now, could we discuss the opportunities offered by federated learning, maybe from a more technical, detailed point of view? Because we've discussed how federated learning in the fields it could operate, apps, devices, which seems pretty helpful as a day-to-day user. I think it's quite useful to saving time on messages if the word is predicted. But in terms of maybe privacy or technological aspects, what are the opportunities of federated learning?
Well, first, you have to understand how AI models are built. So a good AI model typically has good training data that's free of bias. So that's important. So what you want to do is keep control of your data. In federated learning, you do keep control of your data because it stays locally on your device. So this in turn means that organizations which are reticent to share their data can participate as well. Because they don't have to exchange the training data, they can just do the calculation on their side, send the AI model, and participate in the overall federated learning environment. So that's one major opportunity we have, is to bring into the fold organizations that might be reluctant. Also, federated learning is interesting because it has good performance. It doesn't use the network as much as another system where you would have to send all your training data to a central location. Because typically the AI models are smaller in size.
So, the big selling point of federated learning, if I understand correctly, is that the data that is used remains locally on the device, and that supports a privacy approach to AI learning models. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. By keeping the data locally, you ensure that you have some privacy. So in the example we took of the text prediction, you don't send the messages, so you keep them on your device and nobody can actually see them, except you, of course. That's one of the major benefits of federated learning.
You mentioned at the beginning that a good AI model is accurate data and data that has limited or no biases. In what capacity does federated learning help with algorithmic fairness. We can see now with certain apps used on phones that certain answers will be heavily tailored to or speak to certain demographic and maybe forget other vulnerable groups or people of color. With federated learning, can we limit potential discriminatory answers and biases? To what extent can we have algorithmic fairness?
Uh, in a typical scenario, what you would have is a lot different sets of data in a central location. The problem is that those different sets of data are quite limited. In federated learning, you have a lot of devices, and each device can have a different representation of a different group of individuals. In that respect, you do have more fairness and you limit bias. Also, no organization has a complete monopoly on the training process. That as well improves fairness and limits bias.
Having done a bit of research to ensure that our conversation is as informative for our audiences or viewers, um, I've read that certain news reports suggest that federated learning can serve as a shield for privacy in AI, and we've already discussed how the fact that federated learning uses data that remains locally on a device helps privacy. What's your take in terms of the privacy benefits of federated learning, going beyond what we've already discussed on the data protection element side of things?
Since you don't share your data, you actually are more aligned with laws and regulations, such as the European GDPR or the US HIPAA. You minimize the amount of personal data that is transferred, for example. Also, since your data is stored locally and you decide what you do with it, you limit the purpose of processing of those personal data. Imagine if you send this data outside of your device, anybody can take it and do whatever they want with it. If you keep it on your device, you choose what to do.
So we've just talked about the privacy details of federated learning. Um, are there some other challenges? I'm thinking more in terms of cybersecurity and risks. And this is not just an issue personally as a consumer, and I'm sure our audience who consumes these products will be aware and cautious of. We're feeding AI, both non-federated learning and federated learning models, with personal information to a certain extent. And one could be worried, and reasonably so, that this information is leaked either deliberately or through human error, if that's possible. What's your take on, in the context of federated learning, what are the risks, and are the risks going or will be mitigated? What's the landscape on the cybersecurity landscape in this context?
There's another concern that you haven't mentioned is more related to the quality of the training data. Because what you want in the end is an artificial intelligence that actually performs correctly and without bias. That can only happen if your training data is of sufficient quality. Now, in the federated learning world, the training data resides on the local devices, which means that it's difficult to control the quality of each piece of training data that is used. So if you have bad training data, you have a bad AI model, which leads to a bad outcome for the individual. So those are the two main risks you see in the federated learning world.
And to enhance the quality of the data, could there be some sort of criteria, threshold, um, that the data inputted could respect to enhance accuracy? Or is that not even possible because it's so personal and down to each user?
I think it's possible at two levels. First of all, on the local device, you can have the system that builds the AI model and do some quality checks. And also at the central level, when there is one, the central level can check whether the AI model that it receives is of sufficient quality before integrating it with the other AI models. So there is this dual control that you can implement.
A question that's just come up as we were discussing, you mentioned, I'd call it the multiplication of interlocutors in the federated learning world. There are some concerns out there in general beliefs that AI models are bad for the environment because they need so much data and so much energy to process. Is this equal in the federated learning world, or is it a bit more eco-friendly? What's your take on that? Or do we not have enough data or proof or any any proof on that matter?
I'm not sure we have enough proof. I haven't seen any studies done on that subject. This being said, even if you do a lot of the processing operation on the end device, on the user devices, you still need to charge them and you still need to use electricity. Whether or not they're more efficient is still, I think, an open question.
It'd be good to compare in a few years if there's a more eco-friendly way of using AI. But that was obviously not just down to federated learning, it's more due to the entire AI topic. Um, Moving on to the next question. Um, what are the possible future developments of federated learning? So we've discussed the privacy approach that seems enhanced due to the major quality that is its on-device data stored locally, as we've mentioned several times. We've also mentioned the privacy challenges, including the cybersecurity aspects. Going forward, where do you see federated learning evolve? Is there a clear path forward on how to improve the security and privacy issues that we've just mentioned? Do you see federated learning being used in a wider context than the fields we mentioned earlier in our conversation, healthcare, for example? What's the future? What do you think? What are your predictions, basically?
It's quite difficult to predict. This being said, we did mention the security angle of federated learning. I think more and more we're going to see the implementation of secure methods to ensure the overall securities. I can cite a couple, like secure multi-party computation, which actually works on encrypted parameters instead of non-encrypted parameters that guarantees the integrity and confidentiality of the calculations. You can also have trusted execution environments, which is about putting a piece of hardware in your device. Like on your smartphone, you would have an additional chip that would do the calculation within the chip, and that chip would be completely secure and tamper-proof. That would allow you to perform and to calculate, to do the necessary calculation for your AR model. Those are possibilities. You have a different set of measures that you could implement, like differential privacy, where you inject noise into the training data so that no individual can extract training data if it gets hold of the AI model. But those are possibilities in the field of security. When it comes to the adoption of federated learning, I think it's going to increase more and more because of the benefits it gives in terms of privacy. So you mentioned the healthcare world, which is definitely one that benefits a lot because you don't want to send your medical records outside of your device. Especially hospitals are keep that very much internal. You can have other adoptions of federated learning, such as in the security field. Uh, if- there is such a thing called intrusion detection systems that help secure devices. The problem with that is that you have to collect a lot of security information centrally. That's the current practice. If you can offload the building the AI on the devices, you don't have to import all the security information to the central location. So that's potential evolutions of federated learning or further uses of federated learning.
Super. Thank you so much for giving us such a in-depth overview of what is federated learning, the positive aspects for privacy, the challenges for privacy and security, how federated learning is actually very much present in our day-to-day lives as consumers. And thank you to the listeners, to those watching this Tech Dispatch Talks episode 3. I'm Julia Hodder for the EDPS. This is Andy Goldstein from the EDPS Technology Privacy Unit. Thank you so much for listening. See you soon. Bye-bye.